joining us tonight for this public Rules and Reference Committee of Council. This committee is chaired by President Shannon Hardin, but he's graciously allowed me tonight to hold this hearing on ordinance number 1802-2020. Also, this ordinance will be referred to throughout this evening, likely as the wage theft ordinance. My goal tonight is to present what ordinance 1802-2020 will do to help curtail wage theft, payroll fraud, and worker misclassification on city projects, on city contracts and projects, and also to be clear what it will do. Tonight, we have with us experts on this issue from the Columbus community and nationally. We have labor leaders, employers, and members of the public to discuss this important piece of legislation. Before we get to those presentations, I'd like to thank my council colleagues that have joined us for this hearing tonight. I know other members of council send their well wishes, but were unable to be with us due to other commitments. First, I'd like to turn over the mic to President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown. President Pro Tem Brown, do you have any remarks you'd like to share with the group?
Thank you so much, Councilmember Dorans, for convening this hearing and for really championing the topic of wage theft and what we can do as a city for some time now. And I really appreciate your leadership on this and not only the opportunity to, that you have convened the conversation tonight, but just your ongoing leadership. Eliminating wage theft is a critical step towards leveling the playing field for every person and every child in Columbus. It's a critical tool in our tool belt to ensure family supporting wages for all. And I know that we will be learning a lot about the hard facts of wage theft nationally and in our city. And I look forward to that tonight. But I want to stress that I think our aims here are to protect workers and businesses who follow the rules while also holding bad employers accountable. Oftentimes, just because something is the law doesn't mean that it's followed correctly, and workers pay the price. And too often, when workers pay the price, it is the most, actually almost always when workers pay the price, it is the most vulnerable workers who pay the highest price. Women, people of color, and immigrants are the real losers when it comes to wage theft in our city. And beyond them, our entire city loses when we cannot realize that full income that our workers are generating and their full participation in our economy. So thank you again, Councilmember Dorans. I want to apologize in advance that I can't be here for the whole hearing, but I, again, am grateful for you convening it.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Brown. I appreciate being here tonight and sharing that message with us. With that, I'm going to turn off my email so we don't get those annoying buzzes during the hearing. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, who's joined us here tonight, to share any opening remarks at this hearing as well. Councilmember Remy?
Thank you so much, Councilmember Dorans. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I certainly appreciate the work that you've done to lead this charge and to make sure that we're all up to speed on council. These income inequalities that wage theft create for, like President Pro Tem said, the most vulnerable of our workers is a serious threat. And we want to make sure that we eliminate those missteps and misdeeds with our city contracts, but also those that receive incentives from the city of Columbus. And so as chair of the Economic Development Committee, this is particularly important because we want to make sure that that developers and contractors that receive incentives from the city of Columbus also are held accountable. To be clear, the vast majority are do the right thing and are great partners, but we certainly know that there are several out there that don't. And so this theft from not only the workers, but the tax rolls of the city of Columbus, it's important to safeguard. I look forward to the opportunity to learn more tonight and appreciate you holding the hearing. So with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. I appreciate both your comments and certainly President Pro Tem Brown. I think we're in a moment right now in which economic equality has never been more important. It was important before this pandemic, but I think we've seen and had a light shown on the inequities that exist within many wage earners within our own community. So doing what we can from a city standpoint to incentivize employers to do things the right way, and frankly provide a disincentive to folks when they do break state or federal law when it comes to wage and hour rules. I think to President Pro Tem's point, we'd like to think that everyone follows the law at all times about everything. We know that's not the case, and this is why I think it's important for us as a city to do what we can to certainly address this problem. So with that, I'm going to get into the PowerPoint to talk a little bit more about the legislation tonight. And if I'm going to try and do this correctly, but I'm not, let's see. Here we go. All right, look at that. So I hate just reading a PowerPoint presentation to the group, but one of the things I want to do is to educate folks about the current draft of ordinance number 1802, so that the experts that we have here with us this evening can get a little more into depth about wage theft, payroll fraud, and independent contractor abuse in general, and how it applies to the current legislation they have before us as City Council. So bear with us. There's going to be a little more reading of the material that's on the screen. But as we exist in this virtual world, this is sort of the best we can do. And like I said, I think it's important for us to sort of level set to make sure that we understand what this legislation does and what it doesn't do. So just a little background. So Ordinance 1802 was on Council's agenda for first reading on July 27th, 2020. That was our last meeting before Council recess of August. It's currently scheduled to appear for a final vote at Council's next meeting on September 14th. This year. If passed by council, this ordinance will go into effect 30 days after passage, which, if I've done my math right here, is October 14th. I'm not a math wizard, so I'm fingers crossed that someone check that for me. So in general, what is wage theft? What is wage theft in Columbus? Wage theft and payroll fraud have cost workers billions of dollars nationally in take-home pay over the past several decades. And I've heard businesses that are trying to do the right thing to comply with these laws and also compete for business within a community. Wage theft occurs when workers are paid less than a minimum wage, less than the prevailing wage, are not paid for all hours worked, or not paid overtime compensation in violation of federal, state, or local law. Payroll fraud occurs when a business conceals its true tax liability or other financial liability to a government agency by misclassifying employees or paying for business transactions in cash without keeping appropriate records. This hurts workers. This hurts other businesses, again, that are doing things the right way. Columbus has an interest in ensuring that workers in the city, particularly those working on city-supported projects, contracts, and tax-abated entities, are paid in compliance with all federal, state, and local laws. The Ohio Attorney General's office has previously estimated that more than 90,000 Ohio workers were illegally misclassified as independent contractors when they actually were W-2 employees, resulting in a cost to Ohio state and local governments of hundreds of millions of dollars in lost unemployment compensation, workers' compensation premiums, and state and local income taxes. When employers in the city of Columbus commit this type of wage theft or payroll fraud, their unlawful activity costs the city income tax revenue, negatively impacting the city's ability to pay for basic city services that we all need. Council wants to protect workers and law-abiding businesses from employers that misclassify employees at sites covered by a financial incentive agreement or pursuant to or in satisfaction of a contract for goods and services as independent contractors. Council wants the city to take all possible action to recover any benefit or incentive, including the foregone tax revenue provided to entities if those entities, their contractors, subcontractors, lessees, tenants, or occupants are found to have committed wage theft or payroll fraud. Council believes that establishing a wage theft prevention commission dedicated to investigating violation of this ordinance, recommending penalties and remedies for violations, and receiving wage theft and payroll fraud complaints will serve the interests of workers, law-abiding businesses, and residents and the city. We also reaffirm that wage theft or payroll fraud may be grounds for debarment from future contracts with the city, stop work orders, denial, suspension, or revocation of building permits, commercial licenses, and business permits, forfeiture or reduction of tax abatements, tax incentives, tax credit agreements, or other incentives, and referral to local, state, and federal authorities for investigation, further legal action, and possible prosecution. This ordinance is in furtherance of the city's express goals of valuing the dignity of work, promoting broad-based economic prosperity, attracting workers, and aggressively assisting businesses and employers who follow the law and invest in our community to grow. Some of the requirements. The legislation requires employers who receive city contracts, financial incentives, permits, licenses, and other benefits, as well as certain employers who conduct business on sites covered by a financial incentive, to report wage theft and payroll fraud violations to the city and other covered entity. For example, contractors, subcontractors, or commercial tenants. In response to the crisis of widespread misclassification, this ordinance requires employers who use purported independent contractors on city contracts and construction sites covered by an incentive agreement to provide the city with information to confirm that workers have been properly classified. Currently, cases of suspected misclassification are referred to state and federal agencies for further investigation. This is an important point that I want to add to. Entities or businesses that have independent contractors that meet the federal rules around this can continue to use those folks as independent contractors. However, we know that many folks do not meet the lawful definition of a 1099 or independent contractor. This legislation is put into place to discourage the use by making employers show us, the city, that these folks in fact do qualify as independent contractors. This legislation does not create any new or wage and hour law. It requires covered employers to comply with existing federal and state laws as a condition of receiving contracts, incentives, and other benefits from the city. Additionally, the legislation prohibits employers working under city contracts, financial incentives, permits, licenses, and other benefits, as well as certain employers who conduct business covered by financial incentives from employed subcontractors that violated state or federal wage and hour laws in the past 4 years. The city, through the commission established by this ordinance, will publish a monthly list of employers that shall not be utilized as subcontractors on these projects. The misclassification of employees as independent contractors, known as 1099s, is a major issue for both workers and taxing authorities. Workers are denied unemployment and workers' compensation benefits due to their potential misclassification. This is an incredibly important point at a time in which we've seen double-digit unemployment across the state of Ohio and here in our community. I've heard stories of folks who have went to apply for unemployment benefits only to find out that their employer had wrongfully classified them as a 1099 independent contractor and have lost out on hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of unemployment benefits that are critical towards folks putting food on the table for their families during this time of great need. Additionally, taxing authorities such as the City of Columbus do not receive the income tax for the hours worked by independent contractors. This again hurts our ability to pay for basic city services that we all need. Under the Internal Revenue Service's right to control test, few workers actually legally qualify as independent contractors. By us taking additional measures to ensure that those working under city contracts or projects have received an economic incentive to have properly classified its workforce, this not only benefits its workers, but also the city's tax base. The legislation also prohibits city contractors from categorizing its workforce as independent contractors, again, unless it can legally establish that said workforce meets certain legal standards. By relying on mandatory self-reporting by covered employers in combination with a commission of subject matter experts tasked with investigations and making recommendations for corrective action, the need for a new expansive bureaucracy is avoided under this ordinance. Critically, the ordinance does not penalize employers that settle wage and hour complaints with their employers. Again, this is an important part. We're incentivizing folks to do the right thing and to do it if they have had an issue, to settle with their workers as quickly as possible to make sure that workers are made whole. The remedial measures and penalties set forth in the ordinance are applicable only if an employer is adjudicated in a violation of existing wage and hour law after all appeals have been exhausted or the time for filing an appeal has been expired. By structuring the legislation to encourage employers' compliance and employers only penalized for failing to comply with wage and hour laws, and then additionally failing to take action to correct it. If an employer fails to take corrective action, it will result in an adverse determination and will become ineligible for future city contracts, incentives, and other specified benefits for 4 years. This would only occur after numerous opportunities for an employer to take corrective action and provide back wages to employees. If a court, government, or government agency or other body of competent jurisdiction determines that a covered employer who has already received a city contract, financial incentive, or other benefit has violated federal, state wage and hour laws, the legislation vests the authority with the city attorney and discretion to determine the appropriate corrective action. By incorporating a wide range of possible penalties and remedies, the legislation ensures that the city gives due consideration to all facts in individual cases without compromising its commitment to strict enforcement of the ordinance for the benefit of workers and law-abiding citizens and the community. Reporting obligations are set forth in city contracts, financial incentive agreements, contracts and subcontract leases, and other agreements to ensure that a covered employer is fully aware of its obligations of this ordinance. We don't want to surprise anyone. We want to make sure that folks understand what the responsibilities are. And we also want posted notice to inform employees of covered employers of their right to report wage and hour and payroll fraud violations to the city for referral to the state and federal agencies without fear of retaliation. The creation of the commission under this ordinance will receive evidence from covered employers that have received adverse determinations before recommending corrective action. Through public meetings and reports, the commission will inform residents of its actions and furtherance of the goals of educating the public about what the city is doing to investigate and prevent wage theft. This ordinance prioritizes community education about wage and hour laws through a public-private partnership that enlists all stakeholders, including workers, organized labor, businesses, and not-for-profit organizations that advocate for victims of wage theft and payroll fraud. The focus of this legislation is on city contracts, projects, and economic incentive packages. Because of this, the city has the ability to bring meaningful enforcement measures to bear if a violation occurs. This legislation does not address wage theft or worker classification in the private sector, in which the city does not have any involvement. This allows for a much more narrow focus to ensure enforcement is both practical and has proper safeguards in place. This legislation incentivizes employers to strictly adhere to federal and state wage and hour laws. Follow the law, meet your obligations as employer, and nothing changes under this ordinance. However, the failure to follow the law may result in employers' inability to do business with the city of Columbus. Meaning, if an employer values their business relationship with the city, then they have an even more incentive to treat workers with dignity and follow the law as written. This ordinance positions Columbus to lead the nation in combating the crisis of wage theft and independent contractor abuse. The victims of wage theft, workers, law-abiding businesses in our communities cannot afford anything less. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if we're successful. Looks like we are, or maybe not. Okay, I think we're back now.
Yes,
So
sir.
I appreciate everyone taking the time for me to read a bunch of slides to you. And while that isn't anyone's favorite thing to do, the reason I wanted to do that was to make very clear about what is contained specifically within this legislation. There's a lot when we talk about wage theft and payroll fraud that goes into this. There are some things that we as a city can do. There are things that we can't do as a city that are more appropriate to be dealt with at a state or federal level. So the intent of this legislation is to make a meaningful step forward for what we can do as a city to push back on this type of abuse within our community and really take a leadership role, and also to highlight businesses that are doing things the right way. We'll be hearing from one of those businesses later in the presentation as well. So with that, I have spoke for far too long and with slides in front of everyone's faces, which again is not the most exciting thing in the world. So with this, I would like to turn this over to our presenters this evening, who are going to talk more about wage theft and payroll fraud as a issue in Columbus, in Ohio, and nationally, and how that relates to what we're proposing here in Columbus. As we talked about earlier, the timeline for this legislation is very clear. We expect that there may be changes to what we propose, but the vast majority of what we have here, we feel very confident in its ability to tackle the problem in a meaningful way, while also ensuring safeguards are in place. So with that, I'm very excited to hear from a variety of subject matter experts tonight. The first of which is Hannah Halbert, who's the Executive Director of Policy Matters Ohio, which is a leading public policy think tank here in Ohio that has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue and many others that really get at the core of building a more equitable Ohio, a more equitable Columbus. So with that, I'd love to turn the mic over to Hannah Halbert. Hannah?
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for bringing this forward. All right. I think we're on. All right. It's working. Yay. I love it when technology cooperates. So good afternoon, everyone. Councilman Dorans, members of council who've joined tonight. Again, thank you for putting this important piece of legislation forward and for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is Hannah Halbert. I'm the Executive Director of Policy Matters Ohio. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institution that identifies ways public policy can make Ohio a more vibrant, inclusive, and equitable state. And we have about a decade of research and publications on wage theft and wage theft enforcement here in Ohio. So I'm going to present some of the findings from that research here tonight. So the quiet crisis of wage theft has very real costs for working people, for their families, and for our communities. In Ohio, an estimated 217,000 workers have wages stolen by employers each year through minimum wage violations alone. Employers committing these violations are estimated to steal about $600 million each year from workers at an average loss of about $2,800 per affected worker. Now, for a person who's working full-time and is paid the minimum wage, that means they would lose about 22% of their earnings. The U.S. Department of Labor confirmed more than 13,000 distinct cases of wage theft at 620 companies here in the city of Columbus between 2007 and 2018. That included full-service restaurants. Full-service restaurants alone accounted for 11% of those cases. Other key culprits included home health, nursing care, and child care companies, janitorial services, mortgage and loan companies, temp agencies. Wage theft violations often go unreported. So these statistics are really a small fraction of the total violations that are occurring in Ohio. But what they do show is that wage theft happens across industries and to workers at all education levels. We know that wage theft cuts across race and gender. However, the same people who are more likely to face workplace discrimination, specifically Black people, Latinx people, and women, are also more likely to be victimized by wage theft. When we looked at the data showing likely minimum wage violations here in Ohio, we found that Black workers were 70% more likely than their white counterparts to be victims of minimum wage violations. Women were victims of wage theft 73% more often than men. Wage theft is a real problem, and it's a persistent problem in part because state policymakers haven't properly funded enforcement. So just 5 state investigators and 1 supervisor oversee wage theft enforcement here in Ohio, a state that has 5 million jobs. Funding for state enforcement is down more than 24% on an inflation-adjusted basis since 2010, and this has real consequences. The state completed just 542 investigations in 2018. There's simply not enough state staff to engage in strategic enforcement or to develop proactive policies of investigation and transparency. We know wage theft victims are often afraid to come forward to assert their rights. Many workers fear employer retaliation or are especially vulnerable because they're not citizens. The complaint-driven process used by the state makes it less likely that an employer will get caught, and it creates a real disincentive to get payroll right in the first place. Ultimately, workers have less to support their families. Law-abiding businesses have to compete against employers who are willing to skirt the law for their own enrichment. And the bottom line is that lax wage and hour enforcement serves only the unprincipled. So here we are, and it's really up to the cities to lead on this issue. Cincinnati passed a wage enforcement ordinance in 2016, And the Cincinnati Interfaith Worker Justice Center reported that since passage, there is an expanding culture of compliance that recognizes a worker's right to full pay and to fair pay. The center also reported cases opening and closing quickly, with 75% ending with workers paid in full within 120 days. So the ordinance that's before you today gives Columbus a real opportunity to expand on the good work that started in Cincinnati. The city should support honest employers and discourage those who are taking illegal advantage of our workforce. This ordinance includes robust notice and reporting standards, which are among some of the best ways to address wage theft. And notably, this ordinance will make it hard for bad actors to hide in complicated contracting schemes. It really is a comprehensive approach. Wage theft is just too big of a problem to ignore. It hurts some of the city's poorest residents, who are both most dependent on their earnings to survive and the least likely to be able to assert their rights. It costs cities and state vital tax revenues, and it creates an underground economy that ultimately just harms legitimate businesses trying to follow the law. So leadership must come from local officials on this, and this ordinance provides just that. Again, I'm delighted to be presenting on this and to have this conversation here in Columbus, and I will, of course, make myself available for any questions council may have.
Thank you, Director Halbert. I appreciate you sharing that research and sort of your perspective, not only what's going on here in Columbus, but certainly statewide. I'm going to hold questions for the group until we went through everyone, just to keep things moving here a little bit. Next, I'd like to offer the opportunity of Sarah Ingalls, who's the board president of the Central Ohio Worker Center. Central Ohio Worker Center does a lot of work around this type of issue within our community, hosting a variety of wage theft clinics in which they're trying to assist workers who've experienced this type of issue, find ways to get paid what they were owed. So with that very ineloquent way of stating the great work that the Central Ohio Worker Center does, I'd love to turn it over to President Ingalls.
All right, hello. President Pro Tem Brown, Chairman Remy, and members of council. My name is Sarah Ingalls, and I am a labor attorney at a law firm called Bark & Meislish, and also the board president of the Central Ohio Worker Center, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to working with low-wage and immigrant workers here in Central Ohio. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today about the importance of this wage theft ordinance and what it means for the people of Columbus, including the people that are closest to all of us and who we work with at the Worker Center on a daily basis. I'm very thankful that Councilmember Dorans took the lead on this project and is dedicated to ensuring that every worker who performs work right here in Columbus will get paid according to the law. I want to start by providing an overview of the process right now when a worker has a wage theft claim, and then dive into how this ordinance makes a difference. Right now, if a worker has a wage theft claim and wants to get the money that they've already earned, and that's key to understand, wage theft is the non-payment of wages the worker has already earned. The worker must either go to a government agency like the Department of Labor or the Department of Commerce and file a claim, or the worker must go and hire what's known as a wage and hour attorney to litigate the case for them. The Central Ohio Worker Center hosts monthly wage theft clinics that help answer worker questions and that can connect workers in Central Ohio with a wage theft attorney that's willing to take their case at low or no cost to them. Each week, the Worker Center gets around 5 to 10 questions from folks in our community. And each month, the Worker Center receives around 4 to 7 legitimate and valid new cases, intakes from workers right here in Central Ohio. We know that the issue is more pervasive than just these numbers. And as we grow as an organization and we train more volunteers, we get more capacity, we are seeing our wage theft intake numbers continue to grow as well. Too many workers throughout the city of Columbus are struggling due to this pandemic, due to the underpayment of wages, and due to so many other systemic flaws and failures that we can't allow another worker to remain unpaid or improperly classified. As Hannah just outlined, government agencies are overloaded with wage theft allegations and struggle to timely investigate and pursue charges for wage theft cases. That's why when the Fair Labor Standards Act was created, which is the federal law that enforces these wage violations, Congress added a provision to encourage attorneys to take these kinds of cases. And there's several considerations for a worker when they're deciding between having the government issue or litigate the claim for them, or whether to hire an attorney on their own. I'm not going to get into all of those here tonight, but I do want to stop and encourage workers considering their options to reach out to the Central Ohio Worker Center if you have any questions. What I will focus on tonight is one key thing that all workers who come to the Worker Center are concerned about. How soon can I get the money that I'm owed? How soon can they get the money that they have already earned? I will tell you that in many cases, it can take workers 1 or 2 years before they litigate their case fully and get the payment that they're owed. 1 or 2 years. This is because sometimes it takes time to get the complaint together, to wait for the court's schedule, to do the discovery that's necessary in litigation, to take depositions that may be necessary, and then to prepare for trial. In the meantime, workers have families to feed, they have rent, they have mortgage payments to make, they have other basic living expenses. The time that it takes workers to get the money that they're owed is what makes so many workers discouraged and unwilling to pursue even valid claims, even when they have clear-cut cases of wage theft. This is a failure of our system, and it's a major issue impeding true economic justice in this country and right here in Central Ohio. This doesn't even mention the fact that good business owners who follow the law and treat their workers with the dignity and the respect that they deserve are forced to compete with non-law-abiding businesses that skirt the system, that don't pay their workers according to law, that underfund our community systems like workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, and our taxes. The goal is to get the money in the hands of workers as fast as possible, to make them whole by awarding them the money that they've already earned, but also to stop non-law-abiding employers from taking advantage of the most vulnerable in our city in order to make a dirty profit. What the city of Columbus's proposed ordinance would do is this. It would provide some tools in the city's tool belt regarding what the city can do to fight back against wage theft. It would mean that real and meaningful deterrents are put in place and that the city has what it needs to ensure that contractors that it uses and the businesses receiving city benefits are following the law, protecting workers and good business owners. It puts all businesses on equal playing fields, and it protects workers in our communities, but especially the workers who are most vulnerable to and most often the victims of wage theft, including low-wage and immigrant workers. And the best part is that it doesn't create new wage and hour laws. Those already exist. They exist at the state level, they exist at the federal level. What it does create is some method for the city to ensure that businesses are complying with our already existing laws. It's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't the city want to encourage and ensure that business owners comply with what is already existing law? And I'm going to focus on immigrant workers for a second. There are almost 504,000 immigrants in Ohio, making up nearly 4% of the state's population. So immigrant workers make up 4% of the state's population, but they make up 5% of the workers in Ohio's labor force. They also make up a substantial portion of the cases that come into our worker center, showing that the problem here is very substantial. Federal immigration policy remains an obstacle for many immigrant workers, and many workers are afraid to bring claims forward or appear in state or federal courtrooms to enforce their claims, whether they are documented or undocumented. I know this to be true. I've had many immigrants, both documented and undocumented, express concern to me about bringing their claims forward because of what it will mean for their status or for their safety. I could tell you stories about a subcontractor, an immigrant business owner, who was forced to sell family-owned property in their home country when a general contractor failed to timely pay them. I could mention the older immigrant worker at a local restaurant who worked for months despite not being paid an estimated $12,000 that he had already earned and worked for, because he was so concerned that his employer would retaliate against him and call ICE if he filed a claim. I could speak for the restaurant worker who waited 1 year and 7 months before she saw her first payment because her employer decided to fight her in court instead of settle what was a $1,300 claim. And while the city of Columbus doesn't implement federal immigration law, and it can't mandate federal immigration reform, nor does it have the jurisdiction to mandate who comes in state and federal courtrooms, it can take action to protect immigrant workers by encouraging employers to pay their employees. This ordinance pressures non-law-abiding employers because if they litigate their claim and lose, the city will investigate and the city can act. It can review or revoke their permit. It can pull their city-issued license. It can fine them. It can review their taxes to ensure that they have not been cheating our vital income tax structure. And it can take other actions. And the ordinance provides the meaningful mechanism via the commission that it creates to oversee and provide some accountability to this work. Wage theft is an issue that truly affects our communities. Certainly, it hurts the unpaid and the misclassified worker and those that depend upon that worker. But it also hurts our economic ecosystem because businesses that follow the law are forced to compete with businesses that skirt the system. Workers find themselves trapped in unjust workplaces, working for employers who aren't following the law and would prefer to continue doing so, skirting their obligation of payment into our worker compensation system, our unemployment compensation system, and other perks and benefits that employees receive under already existing law. And for that reason, the Central Ohio Worker Center strongly supports this ordinance as is written and encourages council to stand with workers and law-abiding employers in our city by passing this wage theft ordinance. Thank you for the opportunity, and I will stay around for questions at the end.
Thank you, President Ingalls. I appreciate you providing the Worker Center perspective of not only this legislation, but the incredible stories of that are heartbreaking about what folks in our community have faced on this issue in the past. So thank you for being here and sharing. Next, I'd like to ask Mark Fluharty, the Executive Director of the Central Ohio Labor Council of the AFL-CIO, to share his comments.
Thank you, President Hardin, President Pro Tem Brown, Council Member Dorans, Council Member Remy, and all members of Columbus City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to address Council in support of Ordinance 1802-2020. My name is Mark Fluharty. I am the Executive Director of the Central Ohio Labor Council, AFL-CIO. Our President, Theodis James, and the Labor Council is made up of approximately 55,000 union workers throughout Central Ohio. Our mission is to organize and advocate for working people across Central Ohio. That is why I'm here this evening. Through collective bargaining and support for labor laws that protect worker rights and strengthen our communities, organized labor has played an important role in reducing poverty, combating discrimination, and building the middle class in Columbus, in Ohio, and across the United States. The goal of organized labor is to make the benefits of collective bargaining and union membership available to all workers. If we are successful, then we will have more equal pay and a less divided society. But what does that have to do with the Labor Council's support for the Wage Theft Prevention and Enforcement Ordinance, sponsored by Council Member Dorans and President Hardin? In order to protect and raise the standard of living for all working people, we must take action when some of us are being cheated and held down. and law-abiding employers are being undercut by the employers that break wage and hour laws. Wage theft hurts everyone, unions, businesses, city government, and our communities, and the time for action is now. Wage theft victimizes employees across jobs, industries, and income levels, from food service to construction to high tech. Women and workers of color are hit disproportionately hard. It also severely impacts low-wage and immigrant workers. The people who are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, who can't afford to buy health insurance, who don't have paid sick days or vacation time, and that worry about retaliation if they complain. The ordinance recognizes that most employers follow the law. It protects them from those businesses that break the law. With its focus on city contractors and employers that receive incentives and other benefits from the city. The ordinance is a reasonable and measured response to a serious problem in our community. The COVID-19 pandemic and economic downturn have been devastating for working people. Many in our city are hurting. When they go to work, they shouldn't have to worry that they won't get paid the money they are owed. Columbus has an opportunity to do something for these workers and their families. We can send a message that this community supports working people and that we take action when their rights are violated. Victims of wage theft will always have a friend in organized labor. This ordinance confirms that City Council are willing to listen and help them. Thank you for your time and efforts on this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Fluharty. I certainly and sincerely appreciate the support of the Central Ohio Labor Council for this legislation, and not only looking out for their members, but also workers in general. So thank you for being here tonight. Next, I'd like to have Samantha Trueblood, the Senior Field Representative for the National AFL-CIO, share her comments on the legislation. Sam?
Great. First, I would like to thank President Hardin and President Pro Tem Brown and all members of council for the opportunity to speak tonight regarding Ordinance 1802-2020. Good evening. My name is Samantha Trueblood, and I am a senior field representative with the National AFL-CIO, as well as a Columbus resident. As many of you have probably noticed, the economy simply isn't working for working people. Every day, Americans are finding it harder to support their families and keep up with the rising cost of living. We have a generation that is saddled with crushing student loan debt and unable to begin their lives, while those in the older age brackets cannot afford to retire. Millions lack health care and meaningful benefits in their jobs, and the economy is broken, and that's not by accident. Over half of the jobs in the U.S. now pay below $32,000 a year, and as others have said, young, female, and immigrant workers now comprise that majority of who are earning even less than that median income. Currently, we are caught in a deliberate, vicious cycle that helps to separate us from our wealth. This vicious cycle was created in part to starve local governments of tax revenue and workers of their wages. We are left to work harder and longer hours to the detriment of our families, while our earnings remain stagnant. Our communities and schools suffer as infrastructure deteriorates and budgets shrink. This cannot be allowed to continue. In order to end the vicious cycle, one must first acknowledge it exists, and second, create a strategy to repair the damage that it has caused. Part of a successful strategy includes making positive legislative actions that promote protections and equity for all working people. You see, as a union member, I strongly adhere to the belief that an injury to one is an injury to all. And even though I may not have my wages stolen, the fact that others are has an impact on me and my family. Raising wages by fighting wage theft has a direct correlation to improving a city's education, health, and social mobility. When wage theft is addressed head on, its occurrence decreases and working people are able to navigate life easier. Removing wage theft from business practices also restores competition that was once lost through the exploitation of workers by underpayment or misclassification. As my colleagues have shown, wage theft is an expensive injustice that is pervasive in this country. Present-day protections for working people have been eroded and stretched thin, leaving us all at risk of having our wages stolen. The final solution is to enact local policy that returns stolen wages and holds unlawful employers accountable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate you being here and providing that historical perspective as well. Next, we have Mr. John Wentz, who's a partner at Barkin Melchus. He's also a board member of the Central Ohio Worker Center. John, please share any comments you have on the legislation.
Thank you, Member Dorans, and thank you, President Pro Tem Brown and Member Ramey, for this opportunity to address Council in support of Ordinance 1802-2020. As Member Dorans said, my name is John Wentz. I am a labor attorney and partner with the law firm of Barkin Meislich, and I'm a member of the board of the Worker Center. I also reside in Columbus. If Council passes the Wage Theft Prevention and Enforcement Ordinance, our city will join cities across the United States that are taking action to protect public treasuries, working people, and law-abiding businesses from the consequences of wage theft. Wage and hour laws exist for a simple purpose: to ensure that employees are properly compensated for the work they perform. For most employers, this is not a controversial concept. They follow wage and hour laws. However, some employers break wage and hour laws by failing to pay minimum wage, by failing to pay overtime, by misclassifying employees, by requiring employees to work off the clock, by simply failing to pay workers at all, and through other schemes and ways to avoid wage and hour requirements. When employers break the law, employees, law-abiding employers, and communities are victims. Unfortunately, the problem of wage theft is not isolated, but is instead widespread. You have heard from other presenters regarding the staggering economic costs of wage theft. Employees are shorted billions of dollars of pay every year, subjecting them to financial hardship and a loss of respect. What is driving this crisis? A 2018 article by Professor Nicole Hallett, published in the Yale Law and Policy Review Journal, titled "The Problem of Wage Theft," is instructive. The article identifies several factors based on current research, including the employers who are willing to break the law stand to gain more financially through non-compliance with minimum wage and overtime laws than compliance. Some law-breaking employers accept the possibility of a remedy in the future as a cost of doing business. Some additional factors that were identified in the research: many workers are simply uninformed about the laws that protect them on the job. Related, laws requiring employers to disclose workplace rights are routinely violated by some employers. And employees fear retaliation by employers if they complain, so unlawful actions go unchallenged. Wage and hour violations go unreported. In addition, the private litigation system in the United States is complex, it is expensive, and it is time-consuming, particularly for low-wage workers who are the most frequent victims of wage theft. Employees do have the option of filing complaints with the United States Department of Labor or with a state agency. There is no cost to filing an administrative complaint, and the process is less cumbersome compared to private litigation. Unfortunately, as you have heard this evening, Department of Labor and state enforcement efforts are severely lacking due to long-standing underfunding and understaffing. One would expect that the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting economic crisis will place further stresses on the existing federal and state enforcement apparatus. Against this backdrop, a diverse list of cities have enacted local wage theft prevention and enforcement ordinances to protect public treasuries, to protect employees, to protect law-abiding businesses and contractors from the effects of wage theft. The The list includes Boston, Burlington, Chicago, Cincinnati, El Paso, Houston, Jersey City, Minneapolis, New Brunswick, New Jersey, New York City, San Francisco, Santa Fe, Seattle, St. Petersburg, Valparaiso, Indiana, and Washington, D.C., among other municipalities, and a growing number of counties across the nation. The ordinance that is pending before council subjects and includes provisions similar in nature to the provisions found in a variety of municipal ordinances in the United States today. I'd like to highlight a few of those items tonight. First and foremost, the ordinance sponsored by Member Dorans and President Hardin does not create a new set of wage and hour laws. Instead, the ordinance is concerned with adverse determinations or violations of existing state and federal wage and hour laws. This approach is one that the proposed ordinance shares with the wage theft ordinance passed and currently in effect in the city of Cincinnati. The proposed ordinance also ensures that no penalties are imposed against an employer unless an adverse determination has been rendered by a court or other tribunal with jurisdiction, and only after appeals have been exhausted or the time for filing appeals has expired. In addition, as Member Dorans highlighted in his presentation, there's a requirement to disclose adverse determinations. For example, when the covered entity bids or applies for incentives in city contracts. Provisions like this are quite common. They appear, for example, in the Cincinnati ordinance. They also appear in the Boston wage theft ordinance. The proposed ordinance includes mandatory reporting of adverse determinations by entities that perform work on development sites that are covered by financial incentives. This is a provision that the proposed ordinance also shares with the Cincinnati ordinance. The proposed ordinance includes provisions that extend the ordinance to cover city contracts for goods and services. Similar provisions are found in the Chicago ordinance, the Boston ordinance, and the Burlington ordinance. The proposed ordinance before council includes important provisions addressing misclassification of employees. Other Ohio cities have undertaken efforts to address the problem of misclassification, including Cincinnati and Toledo. The proposed ordinance also includes notice provisions, as you mentioned, Member Dorans, included in contracts themselves, notice provisions that put employers on notice of what their obligations are under the agreements, so that there is no confusion and no surprises as to what is expected. That's a common feature across a number of ordinances in the United States. The proposed ordinance also requires covered employers to post notices in conspicuous places so employees actually know their rights under the Columbus Ordinance. Similar provisions are found in numerous ordinances, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Seattle, among others. The proposed ordinance includes a provision that will result in the maintenance of a public database identifying covered employers who have received adverse determinations. And again, by enacting this provision, Columbus will be joining other cities. Houston, for example, the city of El Paso, all have public databases, as do other municipalities. The proposed ordinance provides for the referral of complaints from residents, employees, and businesses to the Department of Labor and other governmental entities for investigations. So if a employee at a covered business, for example, at a covered employer, for example, contacts the city, the ordinance provides that the city will assist that employee and refer the matter to an appropriate agency. The city's not adjudicating the complaint. The city's not the final decision maker. Instead, the city is going to assist the employee so that he contact an appropriate agency for investigation. This is another feature that we find in ordinances around the country, including Cincinnati. The proposed ordinance contains, as Member Dorns, you highlighted, a wide range of potential remedies in response to ordinance violations. Recouping incentives, for example, is a potential remedy. We find that in, among other ordinances, the Cincinnati ordinance. There are restrictions on bidding and debarment provisions, similar to ones that we find in Seattle, for example, in Cincinnati, and in other cities. The ordinance provides for denial, suspension, or revocation of permits and or licenses. This is a common feature of wage theft ordinances. For example, provisions addressing these items are to be found in the Chicago ordinance, the El Paso ordinance, the Philadelphia ordinance, the New Brunswick ordinance, and the Jersey City ordinance. The proposed ordinance contains provisions for the creation and enactment of rules to prohibit retaliation for reporting a violation or a potential violation of the ordinance. Anti-retaliation provisions are essential and they are common. A couple of ordinances that include such provisions, again, from this diverse list: Santa Fe, St. Petersburg, Florida, and others. The proposed ordinance before council includes provisions for community education programs, again, as Member Dorrance highlighted, so that residents, employees, and employers know their rights and know their obligations under wage and hour laws, as well as under Columbus's wage theft prevention and enforcement ordinance. These types of community education programs where government, employee groups, businesses, community organizations act in partnership to educate employers and employees and communities about the importance of deterring wage theft is something we see in a lot of ordinances: Burlington, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, St. Petersburg, and others, just as a few examples. Given the public health and economic costs of COVID-19, as other presenters have highlighted, and the disproportionate impact that wage theft has on communities that are already under economic pressure, the Wage Theft Prevention and Enforcement Ordinance, sponsored by President Hardin and Member Dorrance, is a reasonable and a timely response to a crisis. Wage theft is preventable. This is the 21st century, and we're struggling with a 19th century problem. This is a very important piece of legislation. The proposed ordinance incorporates some of the best practices from existing municipal ordinances into a comprehensive, pragmatic approach to wage theft that positions Columbus to lead in an effective and a sensible manner. If the ordinance deters wage theft in our city, as it is intended to do, it will protect the majority of businesses from unfair competition by employers and contractors that break the law, and working people and their families will have more money for food, for health care, for child care, for rent, for mortgages, for utilities, for education, and for leisure. And they will know that their city respects their rights and recognizes the dignity of the work that they perform. Thank you, Member Dorrance, and thank you, members of council, for the opportunity to speak tonight in support of this important and welcome ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Wentz, and I really appreciate you taking the time to walk through how other cities have approached this issue, how that's similar to what Columbus has done, how it's not similar in some ways, in sort of the aspects that we've chosen to pursue here. So thank you for that presentation, and appreciate you being here tonight. Next, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dorsey Hager, the Executive Secretary of the Columbus/Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades. Dorsey?
Thank you so much, Councilman Dorns. Also, thanks to President Hardin for sponsoring this legislation along with you. Thanks to Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown, Councilman Emmanuel Remy, who were on this call earlier. My name is Dorsey Hager. I'm currently the Executive Secretary Treasurer, the Columbus and Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, where I proudly represent every day 18 local unions encompassing 18,000 members and over 1,000 contractors. Every contractor of which participates in a registered apprenticeship program and provides health, welfare, and dental and vision benefits for their employees and their families, as well as pensions and annuities for every one of their employees. This legislation brought forward today helps all law-abiding contractors, both union and non-union, by creating a level playing field for everyone. Our managers, our agents, and our training directors host countless outreach events to get young people involved and interested into our apprenticeship programs and onto that direct path of the middle class. Many of these events are co-sponsored along with the City of Columbus. Our organizers and our reps visit many job sites, and we are approached at these events and on these job sites by countless workers in the community who are suffering from wage theft, many of them citizens of Columbus. And as has been said earlier, many do not have the financial resources to defend themselves and are some of the city's most vulnerable, the working poor, who are being taken advantage of by their unscrupulous contractors. I'll relate one story to you. While many of our reps were in the short north, an area of Columbus where lots of construction and development is going on, we were approached by a young man who was working as a laborer doing demolition. He was making $20 an hour, but with no benefits, no health and welfare. He was also being 1099'd, which meant he was responsible for his own city taxes, his state taxes, and his federal taxes. Also his workers' comp and his unemployment. So he was working every day on his own without a safety net, something that this ordinance would help provide. This legislation is good for the workforce, it's good for the law-abiding contractor, it's good for the city treasury, and it's good for the city of Columbus, and it is putting us up with other progressive cities around the country who are dealing with this same issue head on. In conclusion, this is America's opportunity city, and it's time for everyone to have that same opportunity to earn a fair and honest living. Any reasonable person would not disagree with the enforcement of wage and hour laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary Hager. I appreciate those comments this evening. Next, I'd like to turn the mic over to Elizabeth Brink, the Chief Administrative Officer for the Columbus City Auditor, Megan Kilgore. As we've heard a lot tonight, we've worked very closely with Auditor Kilgore and her staff on ways that we could structure this ordinance to make their jobs easier and ensuring that the proper taxation is paid to the City of Columbus, again, to make sure that we can afford the basic city services that we all need here in Columbus. So with that, Ms. Brink, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans, and thank you to President Pro Tem Brown, Councilmember Remy for joining us tonight. Thank you to the members of the public who are joining us tonight to learn more about this ordinance and the efforts that the city is taking. I want to thank you for inviting me and the auditor's office to offer testimony tonight supporting Ordinance 1802-2020. Auditor Kilgore is actually hosting another community conversation this evening and couldn't attend. So this is something that's near and dear to her heart. She was very much looking forward to this, but I'm happy to be representing the office. As Councilmember Dorans indicated, my name is Beth Brink. I am the Chief Administrative Officer of the City Auditor's Office Income Tax Division. Just as an introduction to our office and our interest in this legislation, the Columbus City Auditor serves as the city's chief accounting officer. The auditor's office accounts for and reports on every dollar that comes into the city as revenue. And we also set the annual revenue estimate, which serves as the ceiling for the annual budget process. We are very invested in city's revenues. We want to make sure that we're maximizing revenue and doing our part in making sure that the city can offer basic city services to the folks who live, work, and conduct business in the city. Additionally, the auditor's office contains the Division of Income Tax, which is charged with the collection, audit, and enforcement of the 2.5% income tax for the city. So this means that we have a touch point with everyone who lives, works, and conducts business in the city. Our office is in support of this legislation, as it will make sure that the city is not doing business with employers who aren't paying their fair share or holding up their end of the bargain with their workers. It will also provide an avenue to investigate complaints of employers not complying with statutory requirements. This effort is crucial as the misclassification of workers makes for an uneven playing field for businesses and employees, poses a threat to the city's revenues, and ultimately threatens our ability to provide basic city services. It is vital to promote equity among taxpayers so that businesses and individuals who are doing the right thing aren't at a competitive disadvantage for doing so. When workers are misclassified as contractors, employers do not withhold city income tax on their earnings. Our office often sees taxpayers coming in who don't realize that this is happening until they receive a 1099 instead of a W-2. These workers face an unexpected tax bill with us, as well as potential penalties and interest if they fail to file or make a late payment. Add this to the fact that they're likely also finding this out about their federal tax obligations, potentially their state tax obligations, and this is a huge disservice to the folks who are working in our city. This legislation is also important because income tax revenue is the lifeblood of the city's general fund, making up 78% of annual general fund revenues. Income tax revenue supports just about every city service that makes Columbus a great place to work and live. The full impact of wage theft on these revenues is unknown, but it's vast. In 2009, the Ohio Attorney General's office estimated that 90,000 Ohio workers were illegally misclassified as independent contractors when, in fact, they were actually employees. The Attorney General's office estimated that in 2006, those total losses to Columbus's income tax revenue would have been approximately $9.3 million. Now, in 2006, our income tax revenues were $375 million. The city has grown tremendously since then, with 2019 income tax revenues totaling $711 million net of refunds in the general fund. That's nearly twice as much as that 2009 study. An updated estimate has not been completed on the number of misclassified workers, but it is likely that without policy interventions like this problem is growing in size alongside our community. By making sure the city is not doing business with employers who aren't holding up the end of their deal with their employees and providing an avenue to investigate complaints, this legislation helps make Columbus a fair place for employers to do business, a safe place for employees to work, and bolsters the city to provide basic city services. The Auditor's Office supports Ordinance 1802-2020 and its efforts to protect workers and help the city ensure that everyone is paying their fair share. The prosperity of our city relies on the prosperity of its workers, and Ordinance 1802 promotes prosperity for both. I want to thank you, Councilmember Dorans, for the time, for inviting us to be a part of this hearing, and also for your leadership in putting this legislation together. I have really enjoyed working with you in your office in reviewing this legislation, and I thank you for inviting us to be a part of it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brink, for providing the perspective of the auditor's office. And just to repeat what I said earlier, I can't thank you enough, and certainly Auditor Kilgore, who have been great partners with us as we've worked close to a year to get to the language that we introduced at our last council meeting. And certainly you all have been critical partners in figuring out how we would shape legislation that would fit and work for our city and our city's operations. So certainly my thanks to you, and certainly my thanks to Auditor Kilgore, who I know wanted to be here, but had a prior commitment that she wasn't able to get out of. So just want to say thank you both for all the help and work over the past year.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite Richie Brown, trustee of Carpenters Local 200, which is headquartered here in Columbus. Their organization has worked quite a bit, which I don't think even begins to say how active they've been on this misclassification issue, not only here within the city of Columbus, but certainly their efforts outside the city and statewide with their other organizations. So with that, Richie would like to turn the floor over to you to share any comments you might have. Richie, you are there. You go. You are now unmuted.
I'm on? Okay.
There you go.
Good evening. I'm Richie Brown, and I am the wage theft lead for the Columbus office. I'd like to thank everyone for presenting tonight and for allowing me to explain how important it is for this ordinance to pass. For the past few years, I have witnessed and provided video evidence of millions of dollars being lost in the city of Columbus due to wage theft. I've also shared this evidence with the city auditor, the city attorney, and members of city council. The ordinance that has been drafted is the best way to stop this criminal activity while helping the city recover lost income tax revenue. More importantly, it will help stop worker exploitation and human trafficking. This dishonest business practice of paying workers cash under the table has cost the city millions of dollars every year in lost income tax revenue. What is worse about this business model is that it enables worker exploitation. Without representation, some workers are not paid at all for their labor. This needs to be stopped as soon as possible. The elected officials here in our city have been working together to find a solution to this criminal activity, and now we have that solution in the ordinance that I am supporting tonight. I cannot imagine why anyone would try to stop this ordinance from being passed, unless they are part of this underground economy or one of the criminals exploiting workers. I am here tonight to ask every elected official to please support this ordinance and to thank you all for taking the necessary steps to stop wage theft and the exploitation of workers here in the capital city that we all call home. Following honest business practices will never slow the development of our city, but some developers have said they need to be able to cheat honest, hardworking citizens to continue growth. That is a lie, and we all know it. I've had an elected official tell me that wage theft is a victimless crime. Well, I've talked with these exploited workers, and like many of you here tonight, I have witnessed these crimes. So now I take elected officials to job sites in this city, and I let them see what I see whenever possible. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I appreciate you being here and your support of the legislation, and frankly, your partnership over the past year as we've worked on this legislation as well. Our last presenter this evening is Kyle Young, who is the president of Acoustic Ceiling and Partition, a local drywall firm that primarily does most of their business here in Columbus and Central Ohio. And as I think a lot of speakers tonight has talked about, is that the concern at the heart of this legislation is workers and employers. And very excited that President Young was able to be with us tonight to share his perspective on being an employer that is in an industry that has unfortunately seen a tremendous amount of wage theft and payroll fraud, and how that's affected their business operations. So with that, President Young, I'd like to turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member Dorans and other council members. I appreciate the opportunity tonight to speak on this unfair wage fraud, and yeah, it's something that I own a company called Acoustic Ceiling and Partition. We are a metal stud and drywall contractor. We primarily work in the central Ohio area within a 60 to 90 mile radius, working on projects you see every day, ranging from 25,000 up to 30 million. And it is unfortunate that living this every day, we do see a lot of projects that are affected by this, and there's a lot of projects that you see coming out to bid, or that would be a good fit for us and a good fit for the city, that we just don't have the opportunity to, because we know that there's going to be wage fraud on those projects. We look at it that the wage fraud accounts for approximately 25% of a benefit to the people that are illegally paying their employees right up front. That has things like taxes, workers' comp, unemployment, things of that nature. And it's unfortunate that that happens. You know, we've grown from a small company of 20 employees to a company of over 200 now, and we have done everything by the book the right way the entire time. We offer overtime, holidays, retirement, insurance, and are sure to stay up on our taxes and on all those things. You know, a couple of the, it's just unfortunate that some others look at this and I would say prey on some employees, not giving them time to spend time with their families and giving them paid holidays and things like that. And I think this is a great first step towards closing that gap and giving employers that do the right thing the benefit, as well as employees, giving them time and wages and benefits to be able to stay home with their families. You know, it's not just here in Columbus, Ohio. It's a problem nationally. And I'm thankful that you, Councilmember Dorans, has been championing this cause, and I appreciate the work you've done in getting this pushed forward.
Thank you, President Young. I appreciate you helping to provide an employer's perspective on this legislation and certainly the issue that you've been dealing with for some time as a business person. With that, that is our last presentation for the hearing this evening. I want to obviously thank everyone who shared their expertise, and certainly a lot of the folks on this line have certainly provided that expertise not only here this evening, but over the past year as we've sort of developed this legislation, how again we could fit it within how our city operates. Before we get to the public portion of the hearing, I did want to mention that we received nearly 500 letters in support of this legislation, and certainly want to thank the Central Ohio Workers Center for their outreach, informing people about the legislation, and certainly encouraging folks to be engaged with council on this issue. You know, we get a lot of emails, a lot of calls at council, and certainly hearing from nearly 500 people on one topic. Certainly a lot of people to be engaged, and I appreciate those folks raising their voices. As you know, I think this is an incredibly important issue, as we've talked about tonight, and appreciate the opportunity for the public to be engaged on this, because again, at the end of the day, the point of this legislation is to help fix an issue that I know is problematic for many folks in our community. So I appreciate the people who maybe weren't able to join us this evening, but provided written comments and support letters to us. So thank you to those folks who took the time to do that. I'd now like to move into the public testimony for folks. We have 4 public speakers that registered with my office to provide testimony on this legislation. Per the rule of council, individuals will have 3 minutes, and I ask that folks try to keep to that as much as possible. This is Midwest Columbus, so we'll try not to be too rude and cut anyone off with the bell here, but if folks are going on and on, I will certainly cut you off, just giving the warning up front. So if folks could let us know your name, your address, and if any organization that they are here representing, I would appreciate it. So moving into the public portion, if we have everything working correctly, I believe our first individual is Mr. Barton Hacker. Mr. Hacker, are you with us?
I am, yes, thank you. Council Member Dorans and members of City Council who are present, I apologize that my video is not working, but hopefully you can hear me. But good evening and thank you for this opportunity to address you today. My name is Barton Hacker. I'm a resident of Worthington, Ohio, but I represent and am president of the Associated Builders and Contractors of Central Ohio. And we are an organization located in Columbus that represents open shop commercial construction companies, not only in Columbus, but in the surrounding areas since 1969. I'm present here to offer actually opposition testimony to Ordinance 1802-2020 as it's presented. After consulting with our attorneys, we believe that the passage of this ordinance will immediately be met with costly litigation. We believe that's the case because the proposed legislation provides delegated oversight powers that can be used against many contractors in the area. The ordinance creates a 5-person commission and requires it to have a full-time employee. It applies to projects that receive any aid from the city financially or in the form of tax abatements and other incentives. And the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Industrial Compliance already provides appropriate oversight over city-funded prevailing wage projects that this ordinance seeks to address. The remedies and penalties assessed for those deemed in violation of the ordinance therefore exceed the city's authority by giving a non-elected commission and taxpayer-funded employee the power to preempt state and federal law. Furthermore, the administrative apparatus in place at the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Industrial Compliance already exists to address the issues set forth by the ordinance and does not require the outlay of funds to create a new commission from city coffers currently strained by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. If it's the opinion of council that the state enforcement options need to be stronger or that the state's jurisdiction broader in order to more effectively prevent employee misclassification, something that we do agree with, then appropriate action should be encouraged at the Ohio State House and not at City Hall. As presented, this ordinance interferes with a company's right to privately enter into contracts with each other in scenarios where the city of Columbus is tangentially involved. This will potentially ban a larger group of private entities from working within the city, not just those deemed in violation of the ordinance. It creates a centralized reporting authority that allows special interests to act under the color of law. The city ordinance will permit taxpayer money and resources to discredit and attempt to prohibit many contractors and employees from working on City of Columbus projects. And it attempts to supersede state and federal law by improperly governing private conduct. The city, regardless of home rule provisions, does not have the authority to deny licenses or permits to individuals or businesses found in violation of the provisions set forth in this ordinance. Simply put, we believe this proposed ordinance is excessive regulatory overreach. We believe it's poorly written, and we believe it's largely illegal as presented. It is an invitation to lawsuits from a myriad of businesses, contractors, associations, and individuals who will be denied their rights to operate and work within the city of Columbus through the potential of arbitrary enforcement of its provisions. As such, we provide this testimony in opposition, and I thank you very much for the time to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Your testimony is noted for the record. Moving on to the next public speaker we have is Miss Jessica Dugan. Jessica, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Jessica, you have 3 minutes. If you could identify, let us know where you live and identify any organization you are representing.
Thank you, Councilman Dorns, and thank you, President Pro Tem Brown and Member Ramey, for providing the testimony on the record today, as well as allowing for public comment. My name is Jessica Dugan. I am a citizen of Columbus, and I am also a wage and hour attorney that Ms. Ingalls alluded to in her testimony. I represent often in my daily work members of our community, as well as members of the workforce nationwide. And as many of the panelists spoke about, and as you mentioned, Councilman Dorns, in your opening remarks, the current system is not adequate, first of all, to combat wage theft on a broad scale, to process the claims of wage theft, to ensure that employees are not retaliated against for reporting wage theft, and to ensure that the state and federal apparatus to do so are adequately funded. I'm speaking today, obviously, by my opening comments, I'm sure you can tell, in support of this ordinance. I believe that it is going to offer additional protections to workers that are really important by putting a check at the beginning of the process on misclassification that is rampant, particularly in the construction trades and often in the logistics arena as well. I have represented everyone from home healthcare workers, higher paid financial services, industry workers, contractors, retail workers, logistics workers, and restaurant employees, as well as call center employees and people across the spectrum of the wage range. And what I can tell you is that employers will cut corners when they're allowed to do so. And under the current state and federal enforcement apparatus, oftentimes employers are only required to pay the wages back, which on one hand is good for the worker, but on the other hand, as Ms. Ingalls and others mentioned in their testimony, these are wages that were already owed to the worker anyway. They often have no consequences for their skirting of the already existing state and federal laws that they have violated, and often get off with just paying what they should have paid to begin with. The advantage to local ordinances that Mr. Wentz alluded to in his testimony in Boston, in Chicago, and many other cities, is that it allows the city to discourage this type of illegal behavior on a broader scale. It allows the workers to have recourse, and it allows process for the employers under due process. The ordinance does not go into effect for anyone that hasn't been adjudicated to have violated already existing laws. And I think that that's the most important thing about this ordinance for everyone to understand, is that it only applies to those that are violating laws that already exist on the books, laws that already should be the goal to comply for every employer. In closing, I would just like to add that the ordinance would send a message to employers that wage theft will not be tolerated for the citizens of Columbus. And I think that that's an important stand to take, especially in times of an economic downturn where workers are under greater risk to be exploited and and are more desperate because of the lack of work that exists due to the current COVID-19 crisis. Again, thank you for us time as the public to testify, and I look forward to seeing the upcoming vote.
Thank you, Ms. Dugan. I appreciate you being here tonight. Next, we have Mr. Joe Motil. Joe, you there?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Councilman Dorns, Councilman Ramey, Pro Tem Brown. Wage, Joe Motil, 167 West Cook Road, Columbus, Ohio. Wage theft, payroll fraud, and exploiting workers for profit by greedy, well-heeled businesses that has been going on for decades. And it's well documented and known that hundreds of millions of tax dollars in the state of Ohio are lost to this all too common practice. Here locally, not just small business owners and medium-sized companies skirt the law when it comes to paying wages that employees are protected by, but also large corporations such as AEP, the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, Nationwide Realty Investors, and OSU Medical and Surgical Hospitals, just to name a few. As someone who's worked in the commercial construction industry for 40 years, I've actually had workers approach me numerous times asking me for advice on what they can do to force their employer to pay them in a timely manner that was mutually agreed upon them, or not being paid the wages and overtime that was promised to them by their employers. Here in Columbus, I feel like construction contractors in particular have gotten away with this for decades by exploiting non-English speaking workers and others, and also by claiming individuals as independent contractors in order to increase profits. I also feel that the city of Columbus has deliberately turned a blind eye to these practices because of the favorable relationship with the development and construction communities. So as a result, much needed tax dollars are foregone and continues to deprive neighborhoods of infrastructure improvements, educational dollars, and hurt the financial well-being of our low to moderate income individuals and families. After reading the proposed wage theft prevention and enforcement legislation, I am in full support of the language being considered, and especially the penalties that are being suggested, as long as they are delivered equally in a non-discriminatory manner. I'd also like to see an amendment made to the current legislation that would require a posting by the city of Columbus on all construction sites and places of business that provides employees with a condensed version of this legislation and a City of Columbus hotline phone number to call to turn in those violating this ordinance. The ordinance language on the posting should also include language that their complaint is strictly confidential. The posting shall be written in English and Spanish, and if employees are not able to read either, the employer must provide for those employees to read this posting. When calling the hotline phone number, there needs to be an option to speak to an English or Spanish speaking person. The employer would be notified by the city that a complaint has been filed against them. And this posting should be located along with the contractor or business's other required federal and state labor law postings, proof of workers' comp, emergency phone numbers, first aid, and other required postings so that it is in a conspicuous area. I do have a question in closing. I'm concerned about this not pertaining to private companies and would be curious to find out as to why. But I do think that a notification from the city to violators would definitely be a big help, because this has to be handled locally, as was indicated, that the state and federal government, they are not providing enough support to address this issue. So any pressure from the city on an employer, the better. And that really needs to be stepped up a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Motel. Appreciate the support and suggestions, and I will follow up with you offline about that sort of determination between the city and private market. Next, we have Miss Sheila Seifert. Sheila, are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Sheila Seifert, and I live in Northwest Columbus, and I'm a member of the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio, or IACO. IACO is a part of the One ID Columbus Coalition, and we have been happy to work with the Central Ohio Labor Council. In our work with the Labor Council and other organizations for a municipal ID, we have learned about the serious challenges that workers face. We have heard from members of the organizations involved with One ID Columbus about workers who show up to work each day and every day on time and then are not paid what they agreed to or are not paid for overtime. Many of these stories have come from workers who do not have proper ID and fear recourse if they report these violations. Others are workers who cannot find work elsewhere and are afraid to say anything because this is the only job that they can have in order to support themselves and their families. One Columbus feels that this is unacceptable. We therefore support this legislation for a wage theft ordinance and urge City Council to swiftly approve this. We look forward to following up and reviewing how the details for the Wage Theft Prevention Commission are rolled out. We hope that strong provisions are enacted that will allow workers to quickly remedy situations in which they have been victims of wage theft. We also want to see workers receive back wages that were withheld from them. Lastly, we also would like to resume conversations regarding how a municipal ID can encourage workers with no other form of ID to report when they have been victims of wage theft. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here tonight and certainly the support of the legislation. We have one last public speaker, Ms. Karina Turner. Ms. Turner, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Karina Turner. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the ordinance. I am born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. Proud to be from Columbus, proud to serve Columbus. I am a licensed school psychologist, and I was formerly employed by a private sector company that provided diagnostic assessments, long-term counseling, and consultation services to teachers for academic and behavioral interventions for students in need. The issues with my compensation began almost immediately after I was hired by my former employer. I was paid by the hour and guaranteed 40 hours of pay per week. The way I was paid by my former employer changed frequently. Sometimes I was paid through Venmo, which is an online app similar to a Cash App or PayPal situation. Is not supposed to be used that way. Other times I was paid by paper check. Other times I was paid by direct deposit. Occasionally I was not paid in a timely manner. My employer blamed me for the delays and said I failed to submit proper documentation using specific forms that were never provided to me. When I would complain about the delay and point out the forms had not been provided to me, then I would receive my pay, only to experience the exact same thing again later. Originally, I was paid for all the time I spent at the work site where professional services were provided, which was proper. Then my former employer would require me to report to the work site at a designated time and be available to provide services to the client, but would only pay me for the time I actually spent providing direct professional services. I had to remain at the work site as a condition of my employment, even though I was not paid for that time. I resigned my employment because of these compensation problems. I have not been paid for the lost wages, but I am working on it. It's not easy. It takes time and it takes money to recover lost wages. The ordinance you are considering addresses a very real problem. As my case demonstrates, wage theft affects professional employees as well. This is important legislation, and I know it will benefit Columbus greatly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Turner, for being with us tonight and for sharing your story about how this has affected you in your employment situations and putting a sort of a virtual face on the problem that we've been talking about for over an hour now and the need for this legislation. So can't thank you enough for being here and certainly sharing your story and advocating for others, hopefully, that won't have to go through the same thing that you did. So appreciate you being here. At this time, I just want to thank everyone who participated in this hearing and the folks who took the time to watch from home. I hope that this hearing allowed more people in the community to understand this legislation. Again, what it does, what it doesn't do, our focus on workers, employers, and the city. And I think it's clear of the need for this legislation, and I've been very proud to work with a lot of the people who presented tonight on this legislation that has been introduced at council, and we're taking up when we come back from recess in September. Want to thank my council colleagues that were able to join us this evening, President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown, Councilmember Remy, and certainly appreciate the support of the rest of my council colleagues. Quentin Harris from the Department of Economic Development has been with us all evening. They've been very helpful in their partnership and understanding how this legislation would fit into the Department of Development's role within our city, and certainly thank Mr. Harris for being here tonight with us. Want to thank Kevin McCain from my team for helping to set up the hearing and his work on this legislation. The CTV crew, council clerk for putting this hearing together. We seem to keep asking them to stay later and later, even though we're on recess right now. So thanks to Angie and Mark for their work to get this hearing off the ground and keep us moving. So thank you to them. Also want to encourage those who are looking for more information. Certainly there's a couple of public speakers I think we'll be following up with, but folks are welcome to contact my office at 614-645-8201, or they can email me at radorns, DORANS, at columbus.gov. That contact information is also on the City Council website. So if you go to columbus.gov/citycouncil, you'll be able to find me there as well. Email is certainly preferred in these times of virtual working. So if you're able to contact us via email rather than phone, I would certainly appreciate that, although we are checking our messages as much as we can. As the timeline currently stands, ordinance number 1802-2020 to create chapter 377, wage theft prevention and enforcement provisions within the Columbus City Code, and to amend chapters 329, 4105, 4113, 4562 of the Columbus Code will appear for second reading and passage on our agenda at the next City Council meeting held on Monday, September 14th at 5 p.m. Appreciate everyone's time and attention tonight, and really shining a light on the need for this legislation and how we're, as a city, trying to do everything within our power to push back on these practices. Again, to make sure that workers are protected, employers that do things the right way are protected, and that the city can afford to continue to provide the basic city services that we all need and have come to enjoy. So with that, I am gaveling this virtual hearing out, and have a great evening, Columbus.